Better late than never. Good morning, good morning, good morning. We're in here 5 minutes late, and I apologize for that. Happy Monday morning. Hope you had a good weekend. If you were anyone but Bashar al-Assad, I guess you probably did. I'm Ted Rall, and that over there is my guest co-host, producer of the TMI show, Robbie West. Manila Chan is out today. We're taking it one day at a time. We don't really know what's going on with her. Well, we do know what's going on with her. She's dying to get back to the show. But we don't want her to die while doing it. She's got pneumonia and pleurisy, the two great tastes that go together and are really kicking her. Took us in a hard way. So we are hoping that she'll be back soon. I'm sure she's hoping she'll be back soon, but we're going to sort of see how the week goes. In the meantime, Robbie is kind enough to fill in here. So please stay tuned to the Ted Manila Information Show, TMI for short, where we bring you way too much information, as the name suggests. We bring you everything from news to politics to lifestyle, culture, fad trends, what the kids are up to, the taboo, the occult, anything and everything goes, because we think you can never have too much information, or TMI. If you are looking, as Manila likes to warn, for a straight-laced, button-down news program, this show is probably not for you, but hey, we're not going to card you. You can stick around. It's cool. We'll look the other way. It's stuff you know you want to hear about, and maybe some stuff you never knew you needed to hear about. And maybe we'll have a few laughs, chuckles, chortles along the way. We are here live Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. Eastern. You can stream anytime after that, and you can also even watch the back episodes if you are so inclined. Please, 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 please be sure to like and follow and subscribe to this show on Rumble as well as on YouTube. It really helps us. The show becomes viable financially if enough people do that. And if enough people don't do that, well, then we're not viable. Today's show, joining us, we're going to have John Kiriakou. People who are familiar with our old programming network will know John, and of course he's a very important CIA whistleblower. He's going to help us break down the situation in the Middle East, and specifically in Syria, where al-Assad was overthrown over the weekend. Should we just dive into the headlines since we started late? I think that's probably the way to
go. I think so. And just a quick thing about John. I mean, the dude's a bona fide hero. I mean, I don't know anyone else that would sacrifice everything for principles the way that man did.
I couldn't agree more. Not to mention, he's a really nice guy too. I mean, I've met I've talked to a couple of other whistleblowers, and they were nice too, but not as nice as John. So, I would be pretty surly after spending 2 years in jail. After serving my government and trying to make my government better. I think I'd be a grouchy dude. But John's not a grouchy dude. Anyway, so let's get into the headlines. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says that the major Syrian rebel groups, including those who have been designated by the U.S. as terrorist organizations, are saying all the right things amid uncertainty over what comes next following the fall of dictator Bashar al-Assad over the weekend. We're going to work with all the groups in Syria, and as President Biden said yesterday, the rebel groups, including the ones that have been designated as terrorist groups, have actually said all the right things. Robbie, so if after 9/11, Al-Qaeda had said all the right things, would that have been cool? And I think they actually did say all the right things. Well, they said that they were sad about what had happened on 9/11. They denied all responsibility. They promised to try and turn over Osama bin Laden if he was guilty of this. They said all the right things.
Of course. Well, I mean, no, Ted, I guess the question is where do you stand on the transgender bathroom issue? Because if you are a kinder, gentler jihadist, and if you have the rainbow flag in addition to the black flag of jihad, I mean, to me, I think I think that means that you've had a change of heart, that you are now aligned with the West, that you're going to get on board of the program. So yeah, I trust them. Why not? It's not like they would lie to you.
Well, I mean, I don't even know that they're not really saying the right things. Truly. That's not really true.
So then are you implying that Jake Sullivan is lying then?
I'm implying that Jake Sullivan is a very bad person. I'm not even implying that. I just said that very directly. Him and Tony Blinken. Oh my God. All right. Now the better question, Sullivan's quote continues, is what will they try to do to bring about a better Syria? Well, I guess the Biden administration is helping out because they're bombing the crap out of Syria. So there might not be as much Syria left for them to have to take care of. Sullivan added on Good Morning America on ABC that it was good that he is gone, referring to former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, and that the collapse of the Assad government creates risk and uncertainty about what comes next. Duh. There's an opportunity to build something better in Syria, but there's concern that terrorists, jihadis, and other people who do not have the United States' best interests at heart. By the way, why should people in Syria have the interests of the United States' best interests at heart? To say the least, could take advantage of this. We're prepared to work with anyone in Syria who wants a stable, inclusive, democratic future for that country, he said. Sullivan's comments come after President Biden weighed in publicly yesterday, saying that the extraordinary fall of the Assad regime is both a moment of risk and a historic opportunity for the country. Robbie, we'll be talking about this with John Kay at the bottom of the hour. But, I personally, I see this is, to me, this is a TV show we've seen before. We saw it in the late 1970s, early 1980s, when the secular socialist Soviet-backed government of Afghanistan was overturned with the help of the CIA. We funded and armed the radical mujaheddin, who throughout the 80s fought the Soviets and then fought each other. And then eventually some of them became what we call the Taliban and al-Qaeda. And then something called 9/11 happened. So that didn't work out too well for us. And then it happened again in 2003 when we got rid of the secular socialist dictator of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, who had women in the government, and it was a nice modern country. We got rid of him. The whole Iraq collapsed into secular warfare, sectarian violence, and civil war, and radical jihadis took over, and now basically it's a vassal state of Iran. And then we saw it again in the early 2010s when Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama famously bombed and killed. People don't really realize the U.S. had a major role in that, but killing Muammar Qaddafi in Libya, secular socialist dictator who had increased the living standards in Libya to the highest in all of Africa in just a generation. He got killed. Libya fell apart, collapsed into civil war.
And Gaddafi, he pointed out that if y'all overthrow me, it's going to open up the floodgates to Europe for migration.
And then slave markets reappeared in Libya. And so Libya is a complete crap show. And now here we go again. But, maybe the fourth time's a charm.
Ted, I don't know. From the world that I live in, if you keep doing something, if it keeps failing, maybe that's not the best model. So maybe you should try something different. If the entire idea is to export Western values, women's rights, maybe where people have to wear burqas, maybe be able to go to church without having to worry about getting your head chopped off or the church blown up. Maybe you want to support a secular government as opposed to a fundamentalist jihadist government. But what do I know, right?
Right. Well, what does anybody know? Certainly not the State Department does not seem to know much about this. All right, let's move on. In his first TV interview, network TV interview since his win, Donald Trump went through a range of his campaign promises, including those about immigration, healthcare, and his plans for the Justice Department. Trump doubled down on one of them. He vows to pardon people jailed for their role on January 6th on January 20th. First day, I'm looking for these pardons, Trump told NBC's Kristen Welker on Meet the Press. Criticizing the jail conditions, Trump said that the people who pled guilty did so because they had no other choice. Look, I know the system, he said. The system's a very corrupt system. They say to a guy, you're going to go to jail for 2 years or for 30 years. And these guys are looking, their whole lives have been destroyed, Trump said. Well, that's 100% true. I'm going to look at everything. We're going to look at individual cases. According to the Department of Justice, more than 1,500 people have been arrested or charged in connection with January 6th, with almost 900 of them pleading guilty. As one of his campaign's main themes, Trump long promised to free those imprisoned for their participation on that day as one of his first acts as president, oftentimes honoring them at his campaign rallies. I don't really have a problem with that. I do hope that he also considers pardoning some other people, like our incoming guest, John Kiriakou.
No, I completely agree. And about the pardon about John Kiriakou, I've got to admit, I've got mixed feelings. And the reason is, if you issue a pardon, that's implying that John did something wrong.
Yeah,
In
he has to accept it. He has to
Yeah.
admit having done something wrong.
And in my book, John did nothing wrong. I mean,
No.
torture under the U.S. Constitution is illegal. And the fact that he blew the whistle on it, say, hey, our government in our name, I mean, we're supposed to be a republic. It's supposed to be government of the people. So that means our government in my name and yours sanctions the torturing of people. And John stepped up and said that this is crap. You do not have the right to do this. Now, it should be expunged. And I mean, should.
I don't think there's, unfortunately, I don't know that the president has that power.
I don't know, but that's what should happen.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, I don't think but I really don't think the Constitution grants him that power. So this would be the most that a president could do. And, it's definitely imperfect. It's like one of those things where we would all know that he was wronged, but like there would be no way to show it.
That's like with Julian Assange, right? I mean, they found him guilty of privacy journalism. So
yeah, and he had to accept guilt. I mean, it's absurd. He's not even an American citizen. What loyalty do I owe the Australian government? None. What loyalty does he owe the U.S. government? None. So I mean, that's crap. Just complete garbage. Yeah. Anyway, New York City police have again searched a park here in a lake here in New York City in Central Park for evidence, including the gun connected to the shooting death of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. I mean, I gotta say, I understand, he's a high profile murder. And I understand that, it's not really good for the city's tourist business to have CEOs come to town and get whacked on their way to a meeting. But, if the murderer is really popular and more popular than the victim, shouldn't we redeploy those resources? I mean, the NYPD has deployed 300 or 400 detectives full time to try to find this guy. And what we're hearing, it's hilarious. There's horny women who are saying he's so good looking, he can hide at my house anytime. In New York, in Washington Square Park in Greenwich Village here in Manhattan over the weekend, there was a look-alike contest for the killer. I swear to God. And all these people presented themselves, and I mean, I will admit it. Like many, many Americans, if I saw him, I identified him, I would absolutely not say anything to the police.
No, I know nothing. I see nothing.
I can't be sure. My eyes could be lying. I don't have perfect 20/20 vision.
No, I don't either.
Yeah, it's like I could forget what I've seen. I bet there are people who've, if and when he's caught, there will be people who say, well, I did recognize him, but I just didn't say anything.
Ted, I can guarantee you that in my defense, my wife will tell you how forgetful I am. So I have an alibi. I have an alibi. Just ask the wife.
You are not obligated legally to have a strong memory for a wanted poster. I mean, I do think it's kind of outrageous that they're spending these resources to track him down, considering that when the killer is more popular than the victim, let it go, like the song says. Yeah. All right. Anyway, so as the search for the killer enters its 6th day today, officials say they're widening their search. Law enforcement sources now say that the NYPD and U.S. Marshals have sent investigators to Atlanta to make inquiries and review surveillance footage from Greyhound bus stops along the route from Georgia. That's where he supposedly came from, though, not to. Police have not yet named a suspect, but Mayor Eric Adams hinted yesterday that the authorities might be getting closer to publicly identifying the man in the photos. The net is tightening and we're going to bring this person to justice, Adams said. We don't want to release that now. If you do, you're basically giving a tip to the person we are finding, we're seeking, and we do not want to give him an upper hand at all. Let him continue to believe he can hide behind the mask. Okay, so, Eric Adams is not really the smartest mayor New York City has ever had. But what's the word? Oh, I think he's lying. I don't think they have his name. I think if they had his name, in fact, I'm 100% sure if they had his name, they would release his name to make it easier to catch him. They don't have his name. They don't.
Well, my whole thing is how do they not have it? Because I mean, they have him on foot on camera going to a Starbucks. They have a water bottle that supposedly he used. Now they have the gun. I mean,
they also have footage from him in a taxi.
No, so
looking out the window of a taxi.
No, I agree with you. That Mayor Adams probably is about as sharp as a bowling ball on a wet day. But I would like to think that the NYPD, at least from what I've seen on Blue Bloods, is competent. So someone's got to have a name.
Yeah, I don't think they have a name. I think they're BSing. And besides which, is like, what do you mean not give him a clue? Like, he doesn't have access to the internet or television? I mean, he knows exactly. You know what's going on.
Of course he does.
And if you're watching us, dude, Godspeed. Hope you get away with it.
Yeah.
Maybe go to a country that doesn't have an extradition treaty with the United States.
Or come to Montana and run for governor. I guarantee you'd win.
Yeah. Well, come to New York and run for mayor. Guaranteed you'd win. All right. So let's move on here. So only one photo of the suspect without a mask has been made public. That's not quite true. An image taken at the hostel. There's now one, like I said, the taxi one. According to CBS News, NYPD divers searched Central Park's lake yesterday. That had to be nice and cozy at this time of the year. After failing to recover anything from a similar underwater drag a day earlier, that came after a backpack, this is really funny, containing a jacket and Monopoly money that is believed to be the Thompson murder suspects was found in the park. The NYPD officer, Tom Walsh, told the outlet that it made sense that the cops would keep searching the park for clues, especially for the murder weapon in the absence of concrete evidence. They found the backpack here in the park, so it only makes sense that it's a good dumping ground for a gun. Walsh says, man, we must pay these people tens of dollars for their expertise. I mean, the Monopoly money, what do you make of it? I mean, I have ideas.
Well, I don't know. I mean, is it real Monopoly money or is it Federal Reserve notes that...
Well, I think it was actually from the game Monopoly. I suspect it was a message.
Then.
It's a message.
You're saying, so then what you're saying is that the Monopoly money actually has value, and
it's worth the paper. It's worth the paper. He's trolling them. Like, this is about money. This is about capitalism run wild. This is about crazy the health insurance business, and how despicable they are.
I mean, what this reminds me of. I don't remember the dude's first name, but that pilot, last name is Sachs, who flew his little Cessna into the IRS building. That's what this kind of reminds me of. Is like this is to me, this looks like a giant middle finger to the ruling elites, just like, I hate you, I want to hurt you, but I'm not going to kill myself to do it in a kamikaze attack.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, it's interesting to me. I mean, I'm always interested in the psychological components of this, right? Like the mix of of intelligence and mistakes that this guy made. I mean, I will never understand the Starbucks thing. That is such a mistake. On the other hand, using the bike to get away, absolutely brilliant, perfect for New York City. There's no faster way to get around for people who don't really know New York City. That's why companies use bike messengers to get documents and other important matter shipped around Manhattan, because there's literally no faster way to get around the city. Central Park as an escape route, also smart. It's also the place that has the fewest cameras in the city. And you know that if you live in the city or you're familiar with the city. That's smart. Not so smart. Also smart, fake ID, paying cash for everything. Not so smart, staying 10 days in a public place. Like, why not get an Airbnb and, really be on the down low, just sort of living like a local in someone's apartment, except that you would have to use a credit card. But still, who would ever know it was you? You know what I mean? Like, unless you were seen coming and going. I guess maybe that was his concern. I don't know.
With an Airbnb, I mean, I'm going to show my ignorance here because that's not my world. Could you use like a prepaid Visa card?
Yeah,
would that work? Or would you have to actually be a real credit card under your name?
You do have to have a profile, and you do have to have a card. I don't know if a prepaid, one that you buy at the drugstore would work or not.
Because this is what I've been thinking about This is what I've been thinking about all morning. Like, if I was going to do this, and for the FBI people who are listening, I'm not going to do this. This is a joke. And
do not listen, FBI people.
This is me asking a question. Don't deplatform us. If I was to go out and do this kind of thing, I would try to use cash to buy the digital currency that I would need to have, like a credit card or something, and then try it that way. But I don't know if that would work.
No, I don't know either. I don't know. All right, let's keep going here. I see John in the room, in the waiting room, and in the green room. Hey, John, thanks for joining
Howdy,
us.
John.
So we're gonna wrap up the headlines and bring in John. All right, this really made me laugh. You know, bear in mind I'm 61 years old. I grew up in the 1970s when flights were constantly being hijacked to Cuba. One of my favorite stories is Alan Funt from what was that show, that Candid Camera, that he was the host of. He was on a flight that was hijacked to Cuba. And the people on board were convinced that it was the show. Like, come on, look, I see Alan Funt. This is a scam. This is a joke. We're all being pranked. And he's like, no, this is real. They're like, you're great. That's so funny. And then they land in Havana and they see like the palm trees and like the Cuban police and the soldiers land walking alongside it. And they all deplaned and someone punched Alan Funt in the nose. They were so mad. Anyway, a passenger aboard a Mexican airline flight to Tijuana yesterday allegedly tried to divert the plane to the U.S. by use of force, according to the airline Volaris. After departing from El Bajío on route to Tijuana, the passenger tried to redirect the aircraft. We don't really know how, prompting an emergency landing at Guadalajara International Airport. The crew acted in accordance with established security protocols, and according to protocol, the plane was diverted to the airport in Guadalajara, where the airline turned the passenger over to the custody of the competent authorities, Volaris said. United Airlines diverted to and officials have not yet explained what type of force the passenger allegedly used, or where in the United States the individual, who was not identified, demanded to go. CNN reached out to Mexico's Federal Department of Security and Volaris for comment, but did not hear back. Dude, you're going the wrong way. You're supposed to hijack from north to south. That's how this works.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, to be honest with you, I didn't even know that hijacking planes going to Cuba was a thing before I was born. I had no idea.
It was a cliche. It was like a joke on late night television. There were skits on SNL. I mean, it was like a joke. It used to happen all the time.
But why? I mean, why would you go to Cuba? I mean,
well,
just because the weather?
Cuba did not have an extradition treaty with the United States, right? Because of our very unfriendly lack of diplomatic relations. So if you made it to Cuba, the odds were that the Cuban and you had any kind of left-wing political orientation, you would be able to. The Cuban government might provide you with asylum, more likely than not. Not always. I have a personal story where that did not happen, involving the Coast Guard, which is a whole hilarious, crazy story to talk about another time in another place. But the 1970s were a strange time. More cases of a mysterious flu-like illness labeled Disease X were reported in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and the WHO, the World Health Organization, has dispatched a rapid response team to help investigate. Over 400 cases of the unidentified illness, marked by fever, headache, cough, runny nose, and body aches, have been reported since late October in the Panzi Health Zone in southwest Congo, according to the WHO. Half the cases or more involve kids under 5. A 50-year-old man hospitalized in Lucca, Italy, is suspected to have recovered from disease X after going to Congo on business. That, according to Il Tempo in Italy. 31 deaths have been recorded so far. That's down from 39 last week, according to the WHO. This outbreak is centered in a remote rural area of Kwango province, where poor roads and heavy rains means it takes nearly 48 hours to reach from the capital, Kinshasa. The challenges of accessing the region have hampered effort to confirm fatalities linked to the illness. All severe cases involve individuals who suffer from severe malnutrition, adding complexity to identifying an infectious source. Robbie, this reminds me a lot of what happened with Ebola, of course. In fact, there was a little personal connection there, where patient zero to the United States was a doctor who worked for an NGO and had been I guess this was in Rwanda, right, where that happened.
Yeah.
And he flew back to New York. He was from Brooklyn. And he went bowling at a hipster bowling alley in the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn, which is very popular with young people. And I found out later that I'd been at the same bowling alley like the day before. And I'm like, oh man, I almost got me some Ebola bowling, e-bowling experience. Pretty scary. I guess it does feel like a repeat of that.
Yeah, that's an experience I could do without, and I'm glad that you missed that particular bus too. And one of the things I have to wonder is uh, how much deforestation is there around where that little village is? Because I'm not a biologist. I don't pretend to be one on TV, but I do know that more and more germs are being found as the jungles is getting chopped down. So I wonder if there might be some kind of a linkage there.
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, obviously, climate change and global warming, in general, have had all sorts of effects. I mean, there's that book, Germs and Steel, which I love, which is totally about the effects of climate and other and bugs and all sorts of things on human history, which I just think is a totally great, Jared Diamond, great book, very well worth reading.
Speaking of climate, did it ever get cold in New York where you are?
Yeah, define cold. I mean, it's been at night, it's hit the high 30s lately. Today's a little bit warmer, but that's about it. Supposedly there were some snowflakes. It's like the radio said, it's snowing. I looked out the window. I didn't see any snow. Maybe it was snowing by the radio studio, but so it's still not really cold. It's December 9th. What is the temperature right now? The temperature right now in New York City, 47 degrees with a high of 52 and a low of 38 today.
Hell, that's summer weather.
Well,
at least where I am.
I wouldn't. Well, that's true. They're in Montana. All right, let's go ahead and bring in John Kiriakou. Thank you so much for joining us here on the TMI show.
Happy to do it. Good to see you both.
Always.
Howdy, John. It's a pleasure to meet you, sir.
Pleasure's mine.
All right, John, I'm gonna intro the topic and intro you, and then we're gonna do this. All right, this feels like a movie you've seen before. A secular socialist government where women and ethnic minorities have some rights that are respected is targeted by the United States and its allies, in large part because it shows that left-wing politics can be successful. The Carter administration armed the mujaheddin in Afghanistan, setting the stage for al-Qaeda and 9/11. The Bush administration overthrew Saddam Hussein in Iraq, creating a failed state that became a vassal of Iran and a home for ISIS. Obama killed Muammar Qaddafi in Libya, creating a failed state where slave markets have reappeared and radical Muslim fundamentalists hold sway. Now, an officially designated terrorist organization has, with the help of the US and Israel, overthrown Bashar al-Assad in Syria in a matter of a week. Will Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and its reformist leader, Ahmad al-Sharaa, keep their promise to limit their ambitions to the domestic politics of Syria? Will they impose radical Taliban-style Sharia law on Syria? What are the implications for Russia, which accepted Assad but did not provide sufficient air support to protect his regime? Israel has already started bombing Syria, and so has the US, saying that its 1974 peace deal was with the Assad government, which no longer exists. Will the war in Lebanon and Gaza spread into Syria even more? What are the security implications for Israel, which wanted this regime change, apparently, right next door? Joining us is, of course, John Kiriakou, an American author, journalist, and former CIA intelligence officer. He's a columnist and talk show host who was jailed for nearly 2 years for exposing the interrogation techniques of the U.S. government. John, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Ted.
So, John, this is, I know, from us talking, in elsewhere, that this came as a surprise to you as well as to most people. I think we all kind of thought that there was sort of a quagmire in Syria, and that basically forces were pretty much evenly balanced between the Assad government, supported by particularly Russia, and then to a lesser extent Iran and Hezbollah, and the other forces like the United States and the Kurds and so on. What do you think? I mean, you've had more time to think about it now. I mean, what do you think has happened in what happened to Assad? Like, the first hint of this was when that first big city fell up in the northwestern part of the country, and we were told that, quote unquote, dozens of Syrian government troops had died in Aleppo, had lost and the city fell after dozens of casualties. You don't lose a city with millions of people with just dozens of casualties unless basically you're like, in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and you just run away. I mean, isn't that pretty much what happened, and why?
Yeah, that's pretty much what happened. I think that the Wizard of Oz, who was behind the curtain, was Recep Tayyip Erdogan in all of this. The Turks have had a very significant presence in Syria for a very long time. They've wanted this border strip, as a buffer zone, et cetera, et cetera. But what we saw really was, I think, a perfect storm where the Russians are bogged down in Ukraine. Hezbollah has been decimated. I mean, for all intents and purposes, at least temporarily, Hezbollah has ceased to exist as a military organization, thanks to the Israelis. And the Iranians have been cowed by the Israelis into declining to come in on Assad's side. Remember, it was only the Russians and the Iranians with Hezbollah assistance that has kept Assad in power for as long as he's been in power.
Right.
Things started to change a week ago. A week ago Saturday, he went to Russia, ostensibly for meetings with the foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, and with President Putin. He took his entire family with him. But when he came back the next day to Damascus, he left his entire family in Syria. So he knew something that everybody else apparently didn't know. In the meantime, there were 4 flights using the same plane that took Assad, 4 flights from Damascus to Moscow over the course of the past week, apparently with his personal property, with cash, with art, with whatever it was he could get out of the country with. So he saw this coming. Now, the things that have surprised me are severalfold. First, where the heck were the Russians? I mean, this is essentially Russia's only ally in the Middle East. The Iranians aside, that's more of a commercial relationship than a military one. But Syria was Russia's only ally, and they couldn't come up with 1,000 troops or a couple thousand troops or maybe some rockets or tanks to hold this thing off. And secondly, where were the Iranians? The Assad family adheres to the Alawi sect of Shia Islam, right? Syria is a majority Sunni Muslim country. The Gulf Arabs have always had a deep and abiding hatred of the Assad family, and they have supported these Sunni militant groups. So why didn't the Iranians say, "Oh my gosh, there's a danger to Assad. He's one of us. He's a Shia. We have to do something. We can't rely on Hezbollah to cross the border to help him, so we have to do it." And then they did nothing. So I think Assad was in this position this past week where there was literally nothing he could do to save himself. He just had to run.
Are we going to find out that the Syrian army wasn't paid? That's part of what, I mean, I keep looking at analogies with Afghanistan, and then we learned that the Northern Alliance-backed government, the Ghani regime had not been paying their troops for many, many months, and the officers were stealing all the money. So that must be part of it too, right?
I would assume, yes, because their money would be coming from Russia, and the Russians have their own problems right now. I wouldn't trust Syrian officers to equitably provide payment to the men under their command. And when you've got the Turks on the border, you have the Syrian Kurds fighting against you. You have Hayat Tahrir al-Sham blowing you up. The Iranians aren't going to help. Save yourself, man. Go back to your village, get your family, and run. And that's what happened.
So I have go ahead, Ted.
Robbie, please.
No, I just have a question for you. So, as the accent kind of belays, I'm obviously from the South, and so we always study about the great heroes of antiquity. And so I'm thinking about Stonewall Jackson. One of the things that he always says, whenever you're at war, stay on top of your enemies, misdirect them, mystify them, and then you just you crush them.
Yeah.
So my question is with the whole thing with the pagers and with the Hezbollah blowing up and all this other stuff going on, where it looked like Israel was kind of playing hardball with the Hezbollah.
Yeah.
Is it possible that was a misdirection, that the real target was Syria all along, since the Syrian state was hollowed out anyway without a viable economy?
Oh, yes, I do believe that. But I don't even think it was even so secret. I think it was all part of the longer game. Ted and I spoke about this when it took place. I support the Palestinian cause. I support Palestinian human rights. I believe that if we're going to be supporters of peace, then we have to be supporters of peace everywhere. Okay, with that aside, these continued Israeli attacks on Hezbollah have been absolutely brilliant. From an intelligence perspective and a planning perspective, brilliant. I spent 15 years in the CIA. I would have never thought of this. So they knew exactly what they were doing, and they knew the effect that this was going to have. I think the Israelis also learned a lesson when they blew up the Hamas safe house in Tehran. They've been killing Iranian nuclear scientists. They bomb Iranian military facilities. And then the response is, the Iranians lob a couple of missiles and kill some guy in an apartment. And they send over 700 drones and 693 of them are shot down. There wasn't going to be a response. No. They knew that the Iranians weren't going to come to the aid of Bashar al-Assad. And so they decided now's the time. And, there have been little hints in the press over the last 6 months or so that there's been something of a diplomatic rapprochement between Israel and Turkey. Mm-hmm. Now, the Turks have been very public about their hatred of Israel, and that changed about 6 months ago. And I wonder if they've been planning this all along. Because remember, in the Middle East, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Sure.
And if you both hate Bashar al-Assad and you both would rather have chaos than the devil you know, then now's the time to make that happen.
But John, this is the part that I'm most perplexed by, and the question I've most been wanting to ask you.
Yeah, I know what you're going to say.
Why on earth would you want a radical jihadi Taliban-style regime right smack on your border?
Ted, this doesn't make any sense at all. I've said this for years, that the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. And Bashar al-Assad was never a threat to Israel. Never. His country's in chaos. So why make it worse? Why open the door to Al-Qaeda or to ISIS or IS or Daesh or whatever you want to call it? Why? Why encourage that chaos? And if you're an American policymaker, Syria is 10% Christian. Mm-hmm. The only thing standing between the Christian community and certain death was Bashar al-Assad. The foreign minister's Christian. The cabinet has other Christians. The parliament has Christians. And women, right? Women have equal rights in Syria. So
not anymore.
Not anymore. So why would you trade that in for Al-Qaeda? I just don't understand it.
Well, and it's interesting too, because what's very clear is that the leader of HTS obviously studied the Afghanistan example. After 9/11, the Taliban, who, as you and I both know, John, never had any aspirations to rule anything outside of Afghanistan. Hell, they could barely rule Afghanistan. But the Bush administration kind of either pretended not to believe them or didn't believe them. I'm not sure which, but basically tried to say that, they characterized this as like an international terrorist organization, kind of like, making, there's no daylight between Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. And so HTS obviously studied this, and they're like, okay, we want to assure the world we're only out for Syria. We only want Syria. But Syria is a huge crossroads in that period, in that area. I mean, and not to mention, HTS doesn't control all of Syria, and they're not going to control all of Syria because of the Kurds and other things, right? I mean, it looks like a map of post-war Yugoslavia right now. So, the chaos is going to continue. So what do you think is the policy thinking in Washington, like the Tony Blinkens and those people, the Jake Sullivans? What are they thinking here? Are they thinking like, how is this a win for the U.S.? I mean, it's like things can be bad and get worse. This seems to be like a classic example of that.
Well, I think there is no policy. And that's why if you look at the statements that came from the National Security Council over the weekend and the State Department. It was the only thing they redacted was, "Oh shit," and then they said, "Well, we're watching the situation very closely." Yeah, they're watching the situation because they had no idea it was going to happen. This was an intelligence failure, an analysis failure at the CIA to miss this and not be able to alert American policymakers. Not that we necessarily could have done anything anyway, but at least we would have been prepared for some of the initial fallout. And we weren't prepared for the initial fallout. That's why at the NSC, they said, we're aware of the situation and we're watching it closely. Well, what does that mean? And the State Department, we urge all sides to remain calm. Well, thank you for that pearl of wisdom. So what are you going to do about it? And the answer was nothing. They're not going to do anything about it because they missed it.
So, I mean, John, can you tell us a little bit about HTS? Like, I know it's an umbrella organization of a bunch of factions that emerged out of the Syrian civil war.
Yes.
But what more?
It depends on your politics, I think, if you're a Syrian, if you're a Middle Easterner. Because this could either be, the great moderate hope, or this is ISIS. My own personal view is this is ISIS light. So, so Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, which is his nom de guerre, Sharia is his actual name. He was initially the deputy to ISIS founder Baghdadi.
Mm-hmm.
He decided that ISIS was a little too radical for him. So he broke off and he decided to name his group, get this, Al-Qaeda. Then he needed arms, he needed ammunition and money from the West and from Turkey. This name Al-Qaeda was kind of a drag. So we're going to change it. We're going to change it to the Al-Nusra Front. So they changed it to the Al-Nusra Front to make themselves look a little bit more moderate. In fact, they weren't so moderate. And they attracted, but they attracted the support of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. And then the Turks got to thinking, hey, maybe we should start arming and funding this group because they're willing to overthrow Assad, but they're also willing to kill Kurds. And that's cool for us as Turks. So the Turks began meeting with them and said, when you say you're the Al-Nusra Front, people still realize that that's Al-Qaeda. So you might want to change that. And so they changed it again to Hayat Tahrir Hayat al-Sham, and just decided to describe themselves as moderates. And again, I'm going to come back to the second statement coming out of the White House on yesterday, that they are willing to look at this group, to discuss cooperating with this group if it promises to respect human rights, blah, 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 which is always nonsense. But that's where we find ourselves, where nobody really knows what to do with this group except for the Turks, which funded them and created them and supported them, and the Saudis and the Emiratis, which are happy just to continue writing checks and transferring money.
So I have a question for you, John. Kind of just thinking outside the box here. Since the Turks kind of made it their objective to stab Russia in the back, which is a fact, and one of the things we always hear about from the Ukraine war is that borders cannot be changed. They are immutable. These cannot be changed. Well, they're being changed right now in Syria.
Yes.
So with everything that's going on with the persecution of Christians, which is personal to me as a Christian, I worry about my brothers and sisters who are Christians in Syria.
I do too. I'm Orthodox, and they're all Orthodox, and this panics me.
No, very much so. And so my question is, because of the historical ties culturally and historically between Greece, by the time I guess you call it the Byzantines or Eastern Roman Empire, and then the link that the Greeks have with the Russians, spreading orthodoxy, is it possible that maybe Russia and Greece could do something? Like, could Russia kind of entice the Greeks over northern Cyprus, or just causing trouble in Western Anatolia? Could that happen?
That's a great question. And the answer is, until the day that Russian troops crossed into Ukraine, the answer would have been yes. And the United States, over the last several years, has been wildly successful in convincing the Greeks to throw their lot in with the Ukrainians, to the point where the Greeks have expelled the Russian ambassador and they've withdrawn their own ambassador. Greek-Russian relations have never been as bad as they are now. And on top of that, and I'm ashamed to even say this as not just a Greek American, but I'm a dual U.S. Greek citizen now. Right. When Turkey had very long-standing, very close relations with Israel until about 15 years ago, and Erdogan just turned and threw his lot in completely with the Palestinians. Well, again, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so the Greeks, which had very long-standing and brotherly close relations with not just the Palestinians, but with all of the Arab countries, flipped and did a 180, because if the Turks are going to be with the Arabs, now the Greeks are going to be with the Israelis.
Right.
And so not only do the Greeks have terrible relations with the Turks and with the Russians, they also have terrible relations with the Arabs now because they've thrown their lot in with the Israelis. So the Greeks aren't going to be helpful here in any way, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I mean, so what happens now? I mean, I guess my first question is, in the civil conflict in Syria, there's no prospect of unifying Syria under HTS rule, right?
No, none whatsoever.
So is it a frozen conflict, or does it remain a hot civil?
Well, in Syria itself, I think it's going to remain moderately hot, but I think there's a greater danger here, Ted. Lebanon is one of the weakest countries in the world, and Lebanon shares almost its entire border with Syria. They have, of course, that little piece in the south with Israel that's the source of never-ending conflict. But Hezbollah is one of the Lebanese government's leading parties. It's a legitimate political party. And this is one of the weakest economies in the world. It's the second weakest economy in the Middle East, next to Yemen, which doesn't say much. And I would fear that Lebanon is next, because if you have Lebanese Sunnis supporting the Syrian rebels, if you have Hezbollah in a state of complete disarray and chaos, then I would fear for the fall of Lebanon.
You'd have a power vacuum. I mean, the cliche, you remember the joke, right? Back in the 80s, if you get Syria, you get Lebanon for free.
Yeah, I do remember that, actually. People used to say that all the time. And I'll tell you, I was looking at the Iraqi press over the weekend, and the Iraqis are panicking. Like, oh my God, what just happened? And now they have to worry about ISIS returning to northern Iraq and just slaughtering thousands of innocent people again.
Yeah, for people who forget, right, like what ISIS stands for, right? The last IS is Iraq and Syria, and then they shortened it to just IS because they were trying to go big and go beyond that. Okay, Israel. I always thought of them as mean, never thought of them as stupid. I'm starting to rethink that.
Yeah, I think this is stupid.
This is really stupid, right?
Yeah. Listen, as bad as they might have thought Bashar al-Assad was, he was stable. And we would never read articles about, Syrian troops crossing into Israel or Syrians lobbing rockets into Israel. It was a state of I don't want to use the word peace, but it was the status quo worked for both sides. Let's say that.
Mm-hmm.
And now there is no status quo. Now it's chaos. So why in God's name would you want to get rid of a guy that is so weak that he's no challenge to you, but stable enough that he keeps everybody else at bay, and trade that in for ISIS?
And
that
then there's
doesn't make
Russia.
any sense at all.
I mean, my take is, and tell me if I'm wrong, my take is that Russia smells victory or something that feels like it in Ukraine and can't risk taking any way, diverting any resources away from closing that deal as soon as they possibly can. Sorry, Bashar, but we've got to look out for numero uno right now. That's us. But there's still, a loss of prestige for Russia in this. I mean, Syria is such an old ally, right? Going back to the Tsarist times and throughout the Soviet period.
Yes.
And of course, meanwhile, we have the French crowing. Nobody ever mentions the context of that because of their own imperial experience in Syria. But what is going to happen? I mean, to Russia's influence in the Sahel and other places as a result of this.
That's a good question.
If they can't be counted upon.
That's a very good question. And let's let's put this Syria thing vis-a-vis Russia in context too. Syria was Russia's only military ally in the Middle East. There's a large Russian Navy base on the Mediterranean in Syria, and there's a Russian army base outside of Damascus. Those are gone. They're done. The Russians either have left or are in the process of leaving. So this is a major setback for Russia in the Middle East proper. The Sahel is an interesting situation because what we're seeing there are not exactly Russian troops so much as they are Wagner Group mercenaries. Now, of course, they're operating on behalf of the Russian government. But if Russia isn't strong enough to stand up for its only ally in the Middle East, how in the world are they going to get all the way to Niger and Chad and Mauritania and all these other places in the Sahel to support Russian mercenaries? They're not. No. And if things turn bad there for the Wagner Group, they're on their own, which means they're going to die. Right.
Yeah, that's a concern. I mean, and for people who, like me, who don't like a unipolar world and like to see, I think there's more stability in a multipolar world. This is a little frightening.
It is, but I'll make one other comment, and that is the United States has consistently underestimated the importance of BRICS, right? And Russia is a part of BRICS. They're the R in BRICS. If the BRICS countries go forward, A, in expanding, and B, in creating their own currency, then maybe the Russians don't need Syria and they don't need a military presence. They can become an economic superpower again.
This definitely felt like, I know President Putin likes chess, like all Russians, and this definitely felt like he had to sacrifice a piece in order to stay in the game, is what it felt like.
There you go. There's something to be said for a strategic retreat.
There is.
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Cool.
Is with what happened in Syria, is that a warning about having a frozen conflict? Because that's in effect what Syria had in the north with the Turks, with the U.S. in the east occupying the wheat and the oil fields in Syria, and the West obviously wants to have some kind of Korean-style frozen conflict in Ukraine. Well, to my way of thinking, I'm just a dumb redneck. Why do I know? But to me, this looks like this is not something that you particularly want to have happen, or else you could get ergodoned again and get hit whenever you're on the back foot. Is this, could the Russians make a case that this is why we cannot have anything that resembles a viable Ukraine? Like they can't stop at the Dnieper. They have to keep going west.
Frankly, if I were the Russian leader, I would have done that 3 years ago. It's almost as though the Russians were trying to be reasonable about this, and they were trying to reclaim the Russian-speaking areas, the Donbass, Donetsk and Luhansk, and to take back Crimea, which was stupidly given to the Ukrainians in the 1950s. But yeah, you may have a point there that the Russians realized they made a mistake, that they stopped short of Kiev. They stopped short of overthrowing the Ukrainian government, of occupying large swaths of Ukraine, in a lightning strike that would have taken everybody by surprise. And, maybe they've come to the conclusion that these slogs, along borders just aren't going to work over the long term.
No, I mean, we've seen the same situation in Georgia and Azerbaijan.
Oh,
I mean,
yes. We're
and
seeing it in
obviously
Georgia right now.
We're always waiting for China and Taiwan to blow up. I mean, frozen conflicts are not good.
No, if it was me, I would not stop talk to the Polish border, and I would say, "Hey, you want to do this? Let's do it now."
I think Russia. My take on Ukraine, and we're going to let John go. I got to say, my take on that is just that Russia did not want to occupy surly, angry ethnic Ukrainians who did not want to be in Russia. And they kind of, in the same way that Ukraine shouldn't really want to occupy angry, surly ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine, but in Crimea. Yep. All right, John. That's John Kiriakou. Thank you so much for joining us. John's an American author, journalist, and former CIA intelligence officer.
Pleasure meeting you.
He's a columnist and talk show host, and he was jailed unfairly and wrongly, and hopefully will soon be pardoned for exposing the interrogation techniques of the United States government. John Kiriakou, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Talk to you soon.
All the best.
All right, I'm taking John out. All right, then. Okay, so that was really, really good. He's so knowledgeable.
Super smart.
Really knows his stuff. All right, so I guess that does it for today. We'll be back tomorrow. We're probably going to continue to follow the Syria story unless there's developments that require us to talk about something else. But right now, that seems like that's about it. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks to Robbie, a.k.a. Putinbot Gaming, for your support and for moderating the chat and filling in for Manila. Please go check out Putinbot Gaming, the gaming channel. If you like to game, and I know you do, go do that. Please subscribe on YouTube and Rumble. On Rumble, you have a paid option. That paid option is only valid in the next few minutes or whenever the show is live. If you're watching it on Restream, you can also do that. But if you're just watching it on streaming later on, you can't. So if you are so inclined, please do it now. And you can always subscribe for free, both on YouTube and on Rumble. All it means is that we're bookmarked, so it's super easy. If you enjoy what you see and you find value in what you do, you got to support it. That's the way media works nowadays. We're fully independent here. We're not getting any money from anyone but you. So please help us out and keep us to stay honest and keep us to stay on the air. Click on the button right below the Rumble chat. Support the show. Subscribe. And generally speaking, just please support all independent news and content creators. All right, Robbie, thank you so much. I have a feeling you're going to be filling in again tomorrow.
I'll be here.
Manila
I just pretty as Manila, but you're stuck with me.
Yeah, maybe. Manila, stay better. Get better. Sooner rather than later. Okay, everybody, and let's. I know we've got to do the outro.
We got the outro now.
Got to do the outro. Bye.